Professors Speak Out is an edited collection of 20 stories by faculty members and former faculty members recounting their investigations in higher education. DeAndre and Lee are two of these contributors, here to tell you about the experience of being investigated with, as you'll see, much different stories. One thing to remember as you hear them talk is Lee and DeAndre are the lucky ones and that they still have their jobs. Many of the contributors of this book were fired or forced into early retirement. Originally, we were to have a third contributor come and tell her story, but she had to cancel, so I now am pulling double duties of both presiding at this session and recounting my own investigation story. Back to the introduction. A recent report by FIRE indicated that faculty members today are 3 to 4 times as likely as their colleagues during the McCarthy era in the 1950s to say that they've self-censored their writings, lectures, or interviews. Is this paranoid? Probably not. These same faculty members surveyed by FIRE are right to be concerned. The number of times professors were investigated by their speech, as reported by FIRE, jumped from 4 into the year 2000 to 145 in 2022. And this was before the October 7th terrorist attack on Israel, which engendered what we've all come to recognize are strong feelings in higher education. Multiple accounts soon appeared about a new McCarthyism on campus. In my mind, they were fitting complement to the articles that appeared about the new McCarthyism on campus from a few years back in the peak of what we now call the Great Awakening. Professor Speak Out makes clear that many campus investigations have political origins, but the problem is clearly bipartisan. Assault on scholars has come from both the left and the right, exacerbated by social media and political polarization. Other times, it's nonpartisan, as in my own investigations. Why is this happening? Well, the introduction to Professor Speak Out posits several theories. In 2011, the Department of Education issued new guidance concerning about how universities should handle allegations of sexual misconduct on campus. The new rules weaken due process protections for anyone, faculty, students, or staff, accused of sexual harassment or sexual assault on campus. But perhaps more important was the set of perverse incentives they put into place. Colleges were threatened with inclusion on a federal blacklist and theoretically the loss of federal funding, although this has never happened. What did happen is that universities have suffered compliance reviews that cost in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and these penalties would all be levied if universities were sufficiently vigorous in ferreting out misconduct on campus. So this created a perverse incentive, and federal rulemaking designed to cut down on sexual harassment and sexual assault became a framework for punishing things like a faculty member at Howard University who was investigated for 504 days over a poorly conceived test question about bikini waxing. I'm not making this up. In an article that appeared in the New York Times Magazine a few years ago, and then a book, Arizona State's Sarah Viren recounted being investigated by a colleague competing for a better job. So these Title IX investigations created by the perverse incentives established by the Department of Education have become widespread. A second reason for all the investigations is a new generation of students whom John Haidt and Greg Lukianoff call coddled. Students who often believe that ideas they don't like constitute violence. The past decade or so has seen students protesting at Northwestern University, Old Dominion, and elsewhere to demand that the universities punish particular faculty member for ideas they didn't like. At Old Dominion, this in fact led to the resignation of the tenure track faculty member in question. And in an era when universities increasingly compete for undergraduate tuition dollars, students are now more and more seen as customers, and the customers are always right. Universities have to make at least a show of doing something when students seek an investigation. The third reason for the surge in faculty investigations is the increasing ideological tumult of the Trump era. What Barack Obama in the first Trump term referred to as circular firing squads. He denounced, this is where faculty members turned on each other to denounce any manifestation of Trumpism that appeared closer to home. It turns out academic departments are excellent incubators for the narcissism of small differences. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Sayre's law, the notion that conflicts in academia are sure great because the stakes are so small. It's been variously sourced to Woodrow Wilson, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and others. So what this increased regime of investigations means is you can solve your ideological or workplace disputes by other means. You don't have to argue against your colleague in a faculty meeting. You can just denounce them to a university investigator. If they've ever told you to go fuck yourself, well, that's sexual misconduct, given the you think I kid. Yeah. The fourth reason for the rise number of faculty investigations is the proliferation of so-called faculty watch lists of alleged academic radicals. In conjunction with conservative media like Campus Reform and College Fix, these ecosystems reliably marshal social media mobs against faculty, and sometimes rich alumni join the fray. As repeatedly seen, when professors are attacked from the left, it comes from on campus. When they're attacked from the right, it comes from off campus, and it's often with the assault marshaled by one of these outlets. So you'll see elements of that last dynamic in DeAndre's story in a few minutes. So just take these four facts. Changing federal guidelines that seem to incentivize investigations, students who increasingly seek their university's protections for ideas and speech they don't like, circular firing squads as ideologically homogenous departments search out heretics, and a right-wing media ecosystem who loves to pick on, who's constantly looking for targets. And then you put them all in a polarized political environment, lubricated by social media and a mushroom campus bureaucracy dedicated to finding faculty misbehavior, and you're going to have investigations. Harvard famously employs 50 Title IX investigators to seek out sexual misconduct. And when you have that many investigators, they're going to find suspects. Okay, and so there have been a lot of faculty investigations in recent years, and the ones we know about are only the tip of the iceberg. These only tend to become public if the faculty investigated is well known, if he or she sues their university, or if they do as the three of us have done and speak out. So I'm pretty convinced that the three of us are the tip of the iceberg. Just to get an idea of how big the iceberg might be, the Scholars Under Fire database had over 1,300 people on it the last time I checked, and that was before the terrorist attack on Israel. Once you are investigated, you come to encounter a set of procedures that make a mockery of due process that we've come to expect as members of a free society. The consequences are often dire. Many of the contributors to this book were fired or forced out of their jobs. Others were simply silenced. So it was my own experience, having been investigated 3 times, which I'll talk about in a minute, coupled with the proliferation of very well-known cases that got a lot of media attention, such as DeAndre's, that led me to edit this book, because we, as human beings, can identify with stories. They're a good way of getting our message across. So this brings me to introduce Lee and DeAndre. Part of Lee's story is a unique account of how academic compliance in his Human Subjects Committee, his IRB, how anonymous complaints to a committee can be used to put research on hold and require and compliance reviews that would deforest a small country because they generate so much paper. DeAndre's story is remarkable in its scope. It started out as a popular in-class exercise he'd done many times, ultimately resulted in denunciation from Marco Rubio when he was a Florida senator, and the governor, Rick Scott, all, and from this classroom exercise at the same time, denunciations and threats came in from all over the world. So we'll appear in the order in the program. Let me turn things over to Lee and DeAndre, and they'll tell their stories, and then I'll talk about my own investigations. Okay, you're first, Lee.
Okay, great. All right, so this is the story of how Nate Honeycutt, who is in the house. Nate, why don't you let everybody know they can talk to you just as easily as they can talk to me afterwards. And I were investigated and investigated and investigated by the Rutgers IRB for nothing. Nate joined my lab as a grad student in 2016. By 2018 or so, we had begun collaborating on a bunch of projects, mostly surveys, that investigated political bias and radicalization among higher ed faculty. I'll come back to that in a minute. In 2022, we were subject to 3 separate audits of our work initiated by the Rutgers IRB. I'll explain what an audit is in a minute. These involved an outside investigator, so someone not part of the Rutgers IRB, who has this as a job, apparently, who is charged with performing a, quote, for cause, unquote, review of our research. I'm still not completely sure what that term means, but it's something like the IRB received at least 1 complaint about the study. So that makes it a for cause review, I think. I think that's it, but operationally, that appears to be it. I don't know what the definition is. So the first audit caught us by surprise. I'd never been audited. I've been at Rutgers since 1987. I'd never been audited. It's like, what the hell? And the IRB really kept us in the dark about the nature of the complaint or complaints that had been lodged against us. All we knew is there were like some complaints, and I'll explain what they wanted us to do to address that in a minute. But we did everything they asked for because we followed the protocol. The protocol was approved. Fortunately, Nate was really meticulous. I mean, he really oversaw the studies more than I kind of advised them. So he kept meticulous records, and thank the gods that he did that. But okay, so that was the first time. I can yell over that, but in a massive act of discipline, I won't. Okay, then we were notified that we're going to be audited a second time for a completely different study, and then a third one. It's like all of these studies, the faculty produced some complaint. Okay, and we later discovered that the complaints were really bizarre. Okay, so we were never actually told what the complaints were. No one, who complained? Okay, so, confidentiality on that. But, like, what did they complain about? So we were given vague descriptions that the IRB was told that our surveys were biased. Oh my God, offensive, and being used to draw conclusions to support a political agenda. As if there was anything wrong with that, but okay. So I can get to that in a minute. We were never told who made these complaints, nor saw the text of the exact complaints, nor even were told which questions in our survey were found to be biased or offensive. We were given these vague descriptions of what the complaints were. But at Rutgers, and I don't know how common this is beyond Rutgers. I've never looked into it. I suspect it's not completely unique to Rutgers, but I don't know how common it is. But such complaints, as I understand it, always trigger these audit investigations. Okay, so what was the investigation? They required, I mean, it's funny in the aftermath, Nate, but it's like at the time it was torture. Okay, they required us to produce documentation of every single aspect of each of the 3 projects. So all our data, all our research protocols, the informed consent forms, the recruitment materials, survey instruments and questionnaires, data analysis records, records of all communications with the IRB, and with all participants who ever contacted us about anything. So if a participant emailed us, which they did, not a lot, but regularly, a handful regularly on most studies, if a participant emailed us asking us to send the paper reporting the study when it was ready, we had to track down that email and provide it to the auditor. That's because everything. That's what everything means. Okay. They even asked us to, this was so much material, nobody could keep track of it. So they asked us to create explainer documents to accompany the material so that they could figure out what was what. So studies of this kind generate a ton of paperwork, and over the course of the 3 audits, we ended up producing over 3,000 pages of supporting documentation. And it didn't end there. There were hours of phone calls and in-person meetings. We spent more than 5 hours in meetings, 3 meetings with these auditors. There were Zoom meetings. And all in all, the 3 audits took 6 months from February to July 2022. None of the investigations turned up anything because there was nothing to turn up. Each time the auditor reported, and I quote, there were no regulatory findings discovered during this review as the study followed the approved protocol. Okay, so all the time Nate and I, I spent a ton, but if I spent a ton, Nate spent 3 tons. I mean, it really led up the effort in documenting all this. So all this hours in this effort of sort of mind-numbing bureaucratic tedium served no constructive purpose that we could figure out. It was just a horrendous waste of time. And it was a foreseeable waste of time and should have been preempted. And I'll explain why now. Complaints like the ones I just described, the study is biased, the questions are biased, the political agenda, whatever, should be dismissed out of hand because they're irrelevant. They're irrelevant because asking biased or offensive questions doesn't constitute any sort of ethics violation. Let me explain. With one example, and I could do zillions of examples because I study pungent topics all the time. I study political extremism, I study stereotypes and prejudice, I study conspiracy theories, right? You study this stuff, you have to ask people nasty questions. You're asking them, how much do you endorse this horrible thing? Recently, I'm not going to go into this, we have a posted paper, it's not published in an academic journal, called Assassination Culture, about people endorsing murdering people for political reasons. Okay. let me talk about the left-wing authoritarianism scale, which we administered in at least one, maybe all three of these studies. I don't remember at this point. But here are some of the items. People are asked to the extent to which they agree or disagree with a whole bunch of items, but here are three. All political conservatives are fools. If a few of the worst Republican politicians were assassinated, it wouldn't be the end of the world. It is important that we destroy the West's nationalist imperialist values. Okay, researchers have every right to ask these kind of questions. It's like unavoidable if you want to study something like left-wing authoritarianism, because the right-wing authoritarianism scale is just as pungent stuff. Okay, right. The social sciences are filled with questionnaire studies assessing people's endorsement of all sorts of horrible things. This is normal social science. Obviously, I mean, everybody does this if you work in a university. Our participants signed a consent form agreeing to answer the questions. If they came across a question they didn't want to answer, there was no compulsion to answer it. They could have just skipped it. They could have dropped out of the entire study. They were completely free to do whatever the hell they wanted. So what that means is that we were investigated repeatedly for the ethical equivalent of being accused of driving 54 miles an hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone. That is, even if the accusations were completely true, they constituted no violation of anything. There should have been an off-ramp. The IRB should have looked at the accusations and said, okay, bye-bye, see you around. There's no hair here. Okay. But, I mean, in other contexts, the US rules, regulations, procedures have off-ramps. So in the US, anyone can sue anybody pretty much for anything. Like, I could sue you because I don't like your hair color. Like, I can. I could file a suit because I find your hair color offensive. But civil courts have the option of dismissing frivolous lawsuits and making the person initiating the frivolous lawsuit pay the court costs and pay the consequences. So it's not like such a, oh, I didn't know you were here. It's not like, oh, having off-ramps is so hard to figure out. It's like, that's ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous. Okay. Worse, the system is clearly gameable by malevolent actors with vindictive motives, which is what we suspect but don't really know, because we didn't get enough information to know. When we suspect that, because if you're an academic, if you're a far-left academic and you're getting this questionnaire and it's assessing your endorsement of these toxic beliefs, and you sort of figure out we're assessing toxic beliefs among academics, and you might be kind of pissed off about it, and you know how IRBs work, what you could do is file one of these stupid complaints and make life a living hell for us. The goal was probably to shut down the research, which failed, but it was a royal pain in the ass. Okay. And from now that I've gotten active in this IRB space, while our specific experiences may be unique, things related, I think, are fairly common out there. Okay. The IRBs were originally designed to ensure the ethical treatment of people who participate in research. And they have an important role to play, because researchers shouldn't be in the business of doing genuinely harmful or risky things to participants without their consent. But with rare exceptions, those kinds of ethical considerations are irrelevant to the kinds of social science research I and most social scientists conduct, which mainly involves asking people to fill out questionnaires. It is almost impossible. No matter how nasty the question, there is no ethical violation there. I can ask you about sex, drugs, infidelity. There's no ethical violation there anywhere at all. Zero. Go away. Okay. When an IRB exceeds its mandate, it's a violation of academic freedom. But until there's some way of reining in these runaway IRB rules and investigations, nothing is going to change. And actually, I suspect things are likely to get worse. obviously it's vital, in my opinion, it's vital that the IRBs have an off-ramp for these sort of frivolous complaints. And none of these things would be hard to implement if the will were there, but the will isn't there. Okay, all of this raises the question of what to do about this. There's what to do and how to do it. This is on a little piece on what to do. I gave a talk like this at a USC conference on scientific censorship, I don't know, whatever, a while ago. It's part of a panel, and afterward, actually, it was a panel organized by Nick. It was Nick's panel, actually.
I didn't organize it.
You didn't?
No.
Well, not the conference, but you organized the panel.
I didn't do that either.
Who organized that panel?
I have no clue.
Oh, really?
I just invited myself onto the existing panel.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, fine. Who knew? And out of that, several of us talked afterwards about our experiences, and out of that emerged a paper that is now under review. It's titled Reform the IRB, the Belmont Trinity and No More. Allow me to explain. This effort, I'm on the paper, but it was led by Evan Morris, who's sort of a big gun biomed professor at Yale. And even more interesting, one of the other co-authors is Marcia McNutt. Who is Marcia McNutt, you ask? She's the director of the National Academy of Sciences. More on that in a minute. What is the Belmont Trinity? Well, the Belmont Report was written in 1978 and serves as the foundation for IRB ethical review of research protocols. It has three main principles: autonomy, or respect for persons, which is mostly informed consent. It's a little more than that, but that's mostly what it is, especially for the kind of social science stuff I do. Beneficence, sort of, who knows why they're using the sort of GRE word, but basically the benefits of the research should exceed the burdens. That's sort of the core idea. And then justice, which is not some sort of cosmic morality thing, but it's the idea that the benefits and burdens should be distributed fairly among potential research participants. Now, you could debate any of those, and especially how they're implemented. But in this paper, we didn't do that. We accepted all of the principles and the way they're instantiated as reasonable activities on the part of the IRB. What we also argued in this paper, though, was that's it. IRB should be doing nothing beyond ensuring adherence to the Belmont Trinity. For example, the IRB should not be doing things like this: creating or requiring arbitrary end dates to research. Okay? Either don't require a date, or if somebody exceeds the date, so what? How is this violating beneficence? It's like the study's just gone on. It's the study you've already approved. It's taking longer than thought. So what? Oh my God. They should be in the business of assessing conflicts of interest. So, that might be some issue in the publication, but it doesn't, not in the conduct of the research. I mean, pharmaceutical companies are constantly developing drugs. They have a conflict of interest, and thank God they do what they do. Okay. They shouldn't be in the business of requiring researchers to limit data collection. So I don't know if this happens at your institutions, but it is at Rutgers. We now have to give a limit. And if you exceed the limit, you're in violation of the protocol. And I have another horror story about that, which I'm not going to go into. But I'm happy to. Yeah, that sounds good. They shouldn't be in the business of investigating researchers accused of practices that are entirely legitimate on their face. And they shouldn't be requiring methodological changes to minimal risk research. Really, there should be a category called no risk research, because if you just ask people questions, there's not really risk. Okay. In this paper, we identified 10 reforms. To keep this short, I'm going to go into only my 3 favorite, but I'll go through, I'm happy to answer questions about the rest of them, or provide the paper for anybody who's so interested. So, number 1, all IRB deliberations about protocols should be transparent and made publicly available. IRB reviewers should be identified by name with their reviews so they can be held accountable for whether their reviews are reasonable or nonsense. There's more here. And the third one, last, all IRB requirements for submitting a protocol, just for submitting, let alone reviewing, should be justified solely on the basis of autonomy, beneficence, and justice. Everything else should be cut. Thank you.
Good morning. Y'all can do better than that. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It's like walking into a class on the first day and nobody speaks back to you. I'm DeAndre Poole, and first of all, I'm pleased to talk about my story, and I want to thank Nick for the opportunity. When he reached out to me, I said yes, because I think it's an important story that needs to be told. Before I get to the actual incident, I want to start a little differently. I want to share with you some of the hate mail, email that I received, and then I'll get to the incident, because I really want to paint a picture, right? This happened 12 years ago, right, in 2013, and I'm fortunate that at that particular time I was dating my now wife, and after we've had conversations, she even thought about do I want to be with this guy, right? So what is the incident? You probably are wondering what is it, but let me share with you some of the hate mail that I received. Here's one. You have no business being a professor of anything. Your influence upon FAU students is irrational, and you should be subject to dismissal of your current position. You cannot influence the true believers. You cannot tell students to stop when they meant to say stomp on Jesus' name without first believing it. Hey, asshole, be careful. Someone might decide that you'll look good hanging from a tree. Here in Europe, we read about the shocking assignment you ask your student, your class to do, being to write the name of Jesus and stomp on it. There are millions of people who love and revere Jesus. Obviously, you're not one of them, and did not ask the class to write the name of someone whom you love to be stomped on. For there is one God and one mediator between God and man, the man, Christ Jesus, 1 Timothy 2:5. If you do not ask for forgiveness, you will stand before him and you will be stomped on. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Then I had another person that, oh my God, a long one. You, sir, are a disgrace to education, a disgrace to this Christian nation, a disgrace to your race, a disgrace to your family, a disgrace to your university, a disgrace to humankind. We have college-educated idiots going into mass communications, having taken classes from ignoramuses such as yourself, who think that such vitriolic actions are prosper. They are going out showing Muslim, Hindus, Buddhists, Greek Orthodox. It goes on and on. You haven't earned the distinct honor of being called a teacher. Anyway, I just want to share some of this nastiness, this vitriol. And this is only, I was only able to put a small number of them in the book, in the chapter. Now, there were thousands of examples of this stuff emailed to administrators. There were emails sent to department chair. There were emails that were hidden from me that people wouldn't even want to show me, right? And so, and then there was a death threat that was called into a local Democratic Party office, because at the time I was the vice chair of the county Democratic Party. A death threat that was called in that I did hear and listen to. And it was so, they felt it was credible that at one point I had secure officers who were in plain clothes when I had to go to a meeting. And this was not campus related. And then there was another situation where we would have the police, the sheriff car stationed outside of the office because other people did not feel safe. The local city police came to my home and to give me some security suggestions, and even my phone was even marked so that if I dialed 911 from my home, they would immediately come. So what happened to get me to that point where I had to fear for my for my safety. Well, on the night of February 25th, 2013, the evening course that I was teaching at this particular time, intercultural communication, this is a course that I teach quite regularly, and at this particular time, I was teaching, wasn't on the tenure track, and I was teaching a load of 5 classes this particular semester. One of the classes was an overload class, and of course it was intercultural communication, and it was about 25 students in the course. And this particular night we were talking about symbolism and the power of symbols in culture. And then there was a particular exercise that I've used before, right, in this intercultural book written by Professor James Newell. And it has since, the exercise has since disappeared out of the supplemental material, right? So, but nevertheless, I've used this assignment before and taught this assignment before. And the thing about it is this assignment in no way, shape, or form used the word stomp. Did not use the word stomp. Did not even use the word Jesus or Christ. Was referenced letters, J-E-S-U-S, right? The assignment said put the letters J-E-S-U-S on a piece of paper, lay it on the floor, and then ask students to step. Now, sometimes, you know, we all have looked at, you teach supplemental materials to see if there's something, what are some ideas for, you know, what are some activities that I do? I'm very hands-on, very active. I'll create my own assignments. Sometimes I'll see what other faculty members are doing. Just adds creativity and hands-on activities in the classroom. You keep it interesting. So this particular activity, so at the time, the class, everyone stood up and said, okay, think about it, in step. Some people chose not to, and some people did. Then there was a student who didn't like that and then proceeded to yell at me in the classroom, hey, brother, how dare you disrespect someone's I said, first of all, I'm not your brother. And say, and at no point is this talking, you know, about religion. So I asked then a question. I said, how many of you stepped on the paper? And one student raised his hand and said, I did. I said, why? He said, sir, it's just a piece of paper with a name on it. There was another student that said, well, I couldn't step on it. I said, well, why couldn't you step on it? She said, because it has, you know, a meaning for me. I said, okay. So then, as we proceeded to have the discussion, there were some other tensions in the classroom pertaining to the back and forth that the student and I were having. So ultimately, the class ended. After class, that same student approached me and proceeded to verbally yell at me and to approach me with his fist balled up and his palm open to tell me that, you know, I ought to hit you and this and that. And I then, in my mind thinking, it was an exit here. Okay, how am I going to handle this situation? There was another student in the back who witnessed this, right? And so then I yelled, get out, leave now. So he turned and left the room. The other students saw this happen. And so I thought I need to make sure I have a record of this. So before I left the classroom, I emailed the department chair. I called campus security and asked to come so I could file an incident report. And then I made sure on my way home to drop a copy of the lesson as with the activity off under the door of the department chair, because in my mind I said, you know what, this person could go and say something and I won't even have a record of it, so I have to cover myself, right? Well, that same student who witnessed also sent me an email, all right? And so a few days passed by, the dean of students proceeds to, associate dean, do an investigation and found the student violated the student code of conduct for his behavior towards me. not subsequent, but the student then goes to the local news, and the local news then reports that a student was suspended for refusing to stomp on Jesus. And hence, the Stomp Jesus professor. And hence the hate mail that I then received. Even at my own church, people were looking at me funny and questioning me. And they even prayed. Even my pastor at the time, he prayed for me, all right? But even some of them understood. Some of them said, I saw it in the paper. I thought it was a good exercise. And then there was some that said, why did you tell him to stomp on? I said, I didn't say that. So it became difficult for me to even explain the truth. I even called the political official and what should I do? They said, listen, the only thing you can do is let it die out, because it had already spread. And they say, when a story like this spread, it's like wildfire. There's nothing that you can do to stop it. I even had people in Africa calling people, a lady I know in South Florida, asking her, do you know anything? She's even explaining. So, I mean, then you had Chuck Todd talked about it. Ben Carson, when he ran, he didn't have anything positive to say about me. At least Chuck Todd got it right. Bill O'Reilly, of course, he talked about it, but I think it was clear. I mean, there were so many others, even on Fox News, on MSNBC, local news spaces, that were talking about this incident. I mean, it got attention all over the world. But no one really thought enough about what must I be going through when I'm at home and I see myself splattered all over the TV, and they have the worst picture. They had my faculty picture, which looked like a mugshot. And so I'm looking at myself, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what, and then I had this one night I was at home, and I just stopped answering the phone, and there was this loud bang. And I hit the ground, right? I'm in my apartment, I'm crawling on the floor like, oh God, what's going on? I look out the peephole, it's my mom and sister. Right? And they're like, well, you wouldn't answer the phone, we were worried. So, so I let them in. So, I mean, family was concerned, friends, and it was a massive story. And so what happened? Right. I wanted to be able to paint that picture for you and give you some other information. So ultimately, I was placed on leave, administrative leave. Some viewed this as retaliation. Some viewed it as, could they have given you alternative? At the time, prior to that, being put on leave, they moved my classes to online. The student, there was a meeting that I was supposed to be invited to with the student to try to do an mediation. That never happened. Ultimately, the charges against the student were dropped. I didn't find out about it till reading it on the news, hearing on the news that the charges were dropped. The Academic Freedom and Due Process Committee at the Faculty Senate at the university, they did an investigation to ascertain whether academic freedom was violated. And they interviewed the administrators, interviewed department chair, interviewed myself, and they did a very thorough job in conducting an investigation to ascertain the facts. The university at this particular time, and I'm not just the only one saying this, that there were some mishaps, some mistakes in the messaging and how it was handled. At first, they defended the exercise. Then, and I'm saying the administration at that time, the president at that time, they came back and apologized. So it was defended through a statement that was crafted with the department chair, and mine and the director of media. Then they went back a couple of days later and changed their position to say, we are sorry for this insensitive assignment. Will never be used again. That only added to, then I'm thinking to myself, oh, what? You know, you know the facts. Then it was said to me, well, you should have contacted 911, not campus security, because then it would have been a public record. So because the student had protections. So maybe then if I had called 911, then there would have been another story out there that said, oh, the student wanted to put his hands on. So ultimately, I ended up speaking to the local newspaper editorial board and laid all the facts out. And it was the editorial board that actually put together a article that also pretty much put my voice in there to say, hey, there were other things that happened. And that I believe also helped to put another narrative out there. In addition to that, there were students that organized, there were faculty members that organized, there was a rally on campus to support me where students were doing an activity, the same activity. There were people and community leaders that came together. And, you know, what helped me too is I think I was a pretty likable person, you know. That made a difference, you know. But then there were administrators too that didn't really say a whole lot because, again, the pressure, the political pressure from the governor, political pressure from the U.S. senator, all of that political pressure that came down, and the president at the time said she just wanted to defuse the situation, right? Now, did they want to let me go? Sure. But I had a strong faculty union that also stood and supported me, right? And the students that stood and supported me. The student in that classroom that witnessed this incident sent an email that said, I want you to know, I think I have the highest respect for you as a professor. You know, what you, basically, he didn't agree with what that student did. So I also emailed that. So the officials had that too, to know that someone else witnessed what happened. And then the students in that classroom, a few weeks later, after I was placed on leave and someone else was teaching the class, they wrote a letter. I want to share some of that with you. And then I think that will, Nick, that will probably be. And the student said in the letter, to whom it may concern, now this came in April 15th. Now the incident happened when? Back in February 25th. All right, so April 15th is when the students wrote this, and they all signed it. It says, to whom it may concern, when pursuing higher education, students are encouraged to learn how to think, not what to think. During lectures, open discourse, and conversations, especially about controversial issues, aid in the learning process and help prepare students for the harsh realities of life. At least that's what I think. That's what I try to do. Dr. Poole is a great professor and a man of high moral values. We, the students, were not offended by any classroom activities, including the one pertaining to Jesus, which was not specific to symbolize Jesus Christ, in quotes. We stand with Professor Poole during this rough time and refuse to let him continue to be demonized. The purpose of this petition is to let everyone know how the entire class felt collectively and show our support for our professor, Dr. DeAndre Poole. And they signed it, right? So it says here 20 to 23 students in the intercultural class signed in support. So again, that also provided another view of what transpired, right? So you know, some people say, well, did you have to do that? You know, I tell folks that one of the things that one of the media, eventually when I was rehired, they gave me a contract. One of the media professionals wanted them to do more and had some ideas on how to best be able to get my story out, but a lot of people just want to move on. But one of the things in some of the talk I had was, what they would always say, remember, the university is supposed to be a safe space to engage in ideas and conversations. And people need to hear that. They need to know that it's supposed to be a safe space. It's supposed to be a safe space. So that's always something that I, have shared. And when I would be talking to folks, I say the same thing. So looking back, some have said, well, do you think you were targeted because you were, a Democratic Party official? Listen, I'm a vice chair of a county party. What power really? But I have run for office 3 times. This the 3rd time I won. I am currently elected official, local elected official. But each time, or at least the second time I ran, the 3rd time, this particular incident was used against me by my opponent. But looking back, I felt like this incident would have harmed my career if I were not rehired. It would have been challenging for me to find, I believe, another academic teaching position. But the faculty senate rallied around me, the faculty union, students. There were so many others who, behind the scenes, who didn't say much, but who, whatever they did in their capacity, right? I would say, the university community, the president, the provost at that particular time, I maintained my job, but over the summer they were let go. But there were other incidents going on at the institution, not just my incident, but there were other things that some have said contributed to the dismissal of university officials at that particular time. But there was pressure, right? If my union didn't fight for me, then they would have found a way to not bring me back, right? But because the union fought for me, I was able to keep my job. And because of this Academic Freedom and Due Process Committee report that looked at the facts, right? And also looked at the statements that officials made, the political pressure, the political fallout, all of that really just contributed to this crisis situation. And the messaging was extremely not very well, at least conceived, in my opinion. So that's my story. That's my story. I'm still standing, still there. And so there was one other point I wanted to make, that in the climate, I also made the professor watch list. Hey, I was on that too, right? But the one other thing I would say is, certainly in the climate that we're in today, if this had happened, listen, I wouldn't be there. I'd be gone, right? Let's just be honest. So it does have a chilling effect, because even the simplest conversations now, like I had to teach a class last night, and I'm very remote, and I'm very careful what I say. And other faculty members, especially in Florida, just choose not to even have certain conversations anymore. And I have students who I'm not in the classroom putting politics. I like all perspectives. One thing my students will say about me is I have a very open classroom, right? But I think this climate we're in now has really changed higher education. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm thinking in a good way, right? I'm just being honest, because I don't think students are really getting that. Nick, you have some time to present. I don't think students are really getting that the kind of open, hardcore, honest dialogue that I think they need to get. If we're not preparing them, then what are they going to get when they get out here in this real world, where they have to deal with these issues, when they have to deal with political issues, they have to deal with cultural issues, they have to deal with religious issues. If they're not having these conversations, if we're not engaging them, we're not helping them think through these things, then what are they going to do when they're faced with a situation? Ignore it, move on. We can't do that as a society. We can't continue to sweep things under the rug and think they're going to go away. We have to face these issues head on.
So thank you to both Lee and DeAndre for making the trip out here. So I will tell you how I came to edit this book. I'm a tenured professor at the University of Utah, where I've taught since 1998. I'm a quantitative social scientist who writes books about marriage and divorce and how they interact with our larger social institutions. My troubles at Utah became long before I was first investigated in 2016. It really started when I was up for tenure in 2004. Which was an extraordinarily acrimonious process that resulted in a split vote that had to be overridden by my dean. It ultimately boiled down to the fact that I'm a researcher who often teaches. This was anathema to my colleagues, which included a large contingent of deadwood who devoted themselves to teaching. Not doing research. A report literally said, Wolfinger talks about research being more important than teaching. Well, I am at a research one university. Later I discovered it was just a couple of people driving the effort against me, and many more were collaborators along for the ride. But that was a long time ago. I might have moved on if the university had moved on, but it didn't. It was clear they still had it out for me. Froze my salary below $70,000, or didn't change for 6 years. And I received a tenure offer elsewhere. The university failed to make a counteroffer, and I was denied the first time I came up for promotion to full professor. Anyhow, I was finally promoted in 2014. I thought I could just get on with my research. I just published my third book at the time. Perhaps the university had finally moved on? No. In the summer of 2016, I got a phone call from a university apparatchik. The university informed me it was launching a Title IX sexual misconduct investigation against me. I didn't know at the time this would be the first of 3 investigations that would occupy the next 5 years. What had I been accused of doing? Most of the allegations concerned conversations I'd had with colleagues in the late 90s, soon after I'd become a professor at the University of Utah. After work on Friday, we'd often repair to the local pizza place, Pie Pizza in Salt Lake City, for drinks and slices. And so as colleagues, as you may know, people who socialize with their coworkers, sometimes the conversations get off color. And so most of the allegations in my 2016 investigation just concerned things I said over pizza with my colleagues. And here's my favorite. And I quote from the investigator's report. You have recounted stories to female faculty members related to your proposal to your wife and how you proposed at a strip club. True. During a lap dance. False. It was after the lap dance. Now my ex-wife, by the way. So this is true, except for the part about the lap dance. I had recounted this to my 3 fellow assistant professors, all of whom were women off campus. Now, if anyone at this webinar feels scandalized by learning where I proposed to my ex-wife, file a complaint against me. The University of Utah makes it easy with a website and pull-down menus designed to accommodate even the laziest of accusers. I'm not joking. You don't like anything any of us have said, file an investigation. It's just that easy. So the charges had a whole lot of stuff like this, but what I found the most ominous were the allegations of an unnamed reporter who'd phoned allegedly phoned my academic department to say something, complain about something I'd said. What reporter? Well, I study marriage and divorce. I've talked to hundreds of them in the course of my career. What did I said? I don't have a clue, although potty mouth is a good bet, as you've probably already noticed. I don't know the answer to these questions, and I'll never know. Indeed, I don't really know if I'd ever talked to this journalist or whether she was actually a journalist. It's really hard to imagine anything having a more chilling effect on your scholarly life than the prospect that anybody can contact your university to complain about anything at any time. And hey, if any of you got a bad grade in college, now's the time for payback. 4 months later, I was found not responsible of sexual misconduct, but I wasn't out of the woods yet. Although irrelevant to the investigation allegations against me, the investigators found a report went to some length to depict me as a lousy colleague. And this was documented. I rolled my eyes in faculty meetings. I had said fuck once, and so on. It was clear that the investigation was trying to gin up source material for another complaint, because they had talked to all of my colleagues and tried to talk to all the graduate students in the department, and that this other complaint would emanate from elsewhere in the university. And this turns out to be a common practice in higher education. You exonerate a faculty member in a Title IX sex case, then you punish them anyhow. University regulations include weasel words like collegiality that can be used to punish anybody at any time. 2 months later, the complaint arrived, indeed about my collegiality, from my dean. It recounted my hostile body language. That's an exact quote. In faculty meetings, my time I said fuck and so on. For this, the dean sought to impose 2 penalties. The first was an official reprimand with the promise that I'd be fired if my body language didn't improve right away. The second was the loss of a month's pay. Think about that for a minute. Have you ever heard of a faculty member being fined thousands of dollars for anything, let alone hostile body language? So the University of Utah adheres to the AAUP model rules for faculty disputes, meaning I was entitled to a hearing of a jury of my peers. But I didn't relish the idea. It was just I'd have to pay my lawyer thousands of dollars more. It thus came as a considerable relief when the vice president for faculty, who outranks the dean in the food chain, realized that it was nuts to fine me $5,000 for hostile body language and just made the whole thing go away. So in higher education, the investigation itself is often the punishment, as especially Lee's case makes clear. You take it seriously when your tenure position is on the line. You have to write a lot of memos, so many memos. As of 2025, the University of Utah has inflicted over 50 pages of memos that I've written on me. And so far, I was already at $14,000 on attorney's fees. So I sought to make lemonade out of the university's lemons. I wrote articles about both my investigations and spoke out publicly. I did a webinar about how Title IX had been distorted far beyond its original purview of gender equity in higher education. I spoke at 2 Federal Department of Education open hearings devoted to how its guidelines should be revised. And I started volunteering for a nonprofit called Families Advocating for Campus Equality, or FACE. FACE does 2 things. It lobbies for better state and federal rules, and it provides peer counseling to people who've been falsely accused on campus. Clients are mostly undergraduate students, but there are plenty of faculty, and I became FACE's faculty coordinator. The person who talked to all faculty members who reached out to us. And this is how I met 2 of the contributors to this book, Bob Frodeman and Buddy Ullman. It's how I learned that stories like ours are the tip of the iceberg. Like Richard Nixon in 1960, my dean had lost the battle but not the war. Also like Also like Richard Nixon, she had retreated into several years of quiescence to grind her gears and plot her next campaign. And the other shoe dropped in 2020. Like most investigations in 2020, the trouble started over a tweet. A woman whose profile indicated she was a graduate student idly implied that I was a sexual predator. I responded that students shouldn't say things like this to professors. This is self-evident, since we'll someday be writing them letters of recommendation and hiring them into professorships, or not in her case. Twitter, replete with all of its COVID-baked brain, decided I had threatened the student, and I was mobbed. With people all over the world denouncing me and promising to call the university, complain about the monster in its midst. Unfortunately, this grad student turned out to be a student in another department at my university. Of course, there's no way I could really threaten a student. Could I call up a colleague in that department and implore them to punish a student because she'd sassed me on Twitter? Of course not, but my dean had her opening. That same day, I later learned she'd contacted the student to make sure the student was okay. Of course the student was, but the real purpose was just to get dirt on me. A couple months later, I learned that my dean now intended to reprimand me again. On the advice of my attorney, who is now Samantha Harris, who's an attorney who works only in the higher education space, and I'd met by appearing on a webinar with her, I protested that the dean had skipped over the preferred remedy of informal mediation. So the new vice president of her faculty, and fortunately this wasn't the one who had saved my bacon a couple years ago, held 2 Zooms with me with the stated intention of mediation. She pretended at both. Most of the second session was taken up by the bizarre allegation that I was drunk, which is ridiculous since I haven't had a drink since I was a teenager. As you can probably guess, I have other vices. Anyhow, this was most of the meeting. I made several proposals for how we might move past this. The university made no counter proposals. Sometime after that, the vice president informed me that the informal mediation had failed and she'd added her name to the dean's complaint. And so I was finally headed to that trial with a jury of my peers. I suppose I'm lucky that my Zoom hearing lasted a little over 3 hours. Professor Speak Out author Teresa Buchanan described how she was fired from her tenured position at Louisiana State University after a hearing that lasted 11 and a half hours, all in a single day. My hearing was full of attempts to blame me for almost everything that had ever gone wrong at the University of Utah. In fact, I was surprised they hadn't mentioned cold fusion. If you're older, you know what I'm talking about. Within 20 minutes, for instance, my dean had made the claim that my tweet had harmed the recruitment of graduate students and new faculty members. A colleague of mine, who had appeared as a witness for the prosecution, speculated that my tweets were responsible for an underwhelming volume of applicants for faculty posts in my department. The other complaint that was repeated, that I had chilled student speech, was risible on the surface. The student I'd purportedly threatened had publicly insinuated I was complicit in sex crimes with utter impunity. Meanwhile, I've been subjected to a 3-hour hearing, over $10,000 more in attorney's fees, and I'd been threatened with termination. Just whose speech was being chilled here? In the end, the kangaroo court determined by a split vote that I had indeed acted unprofessionally, and I received an official reprimand with the suggestion that I be fired if I misbehaved again. Thankfully, I have a new dean and a new chair, and they've left me alone. It really helps when you have a chair who grew up in China during the Cultural Revolution. She's left me alone. It also helps that I don't live in Utah and haven't actually been in a room with my colleagues for over 6 years. Hopefully that'll continue. My father was an academic, a political scientist for a long time, and my mother came to New Academics Well and said, basically, people become professors because they want to be left alone. And in my case, it was true. So what are the stakes here? Let me quote from the end of my story and Professor Speak Out. It's a privilege to be editing this volume and contributing a chapter to it. For all its faults, academia is the only profession that allows its members to publicly criticize their employers with virtual impunity. This is part and parcel of the rightful objective of the social sciences, which is to make sense of the world human beings have created. It's also what I've done in my scholarship, relying primarily on national data to better understand trends in sex, marriage, and divorce, and how these basic human activities interact with larger social institutions. This book seeks to shine a spotlight on how universities have failed both their faculty members and their broader mission through the arbitrary and capricious imposition of kangaroo courts and harsh justice. The experience of my fellow authors, many of whom suffered far more than I have at the hands of our institution, strike at the heart of the academic ideal of open inquiry. I can imagine our best and our brightest forsaking academia as a career choice if they anticipate only starred chambers and intellectual blinkers. What kind of universities would we have if faculty can't speak, write, or teach the truth? Who'd want to work at universities like this? Let's not find out. And so thank you everyone who came today. I have a limited number of copies of the book on sale at my cost of $30. Thank you everyone. Thanks for Yeah, go for it. You want a mic? I do. All right.
This question is for Lee in particular. Knowing what you know now and you've been through, would you recommend to another faculty member at Rutgers who's approached by the IRB that the faculty member refuse to cooperate, get a lawyer, and become aggressive in, say, responding and counterattacking?
I would love for that to happen, but I would not recommend that. To a person. That was the question you asked, but I would recommend it. Again, I would love for somebody, I would genuinely love, and I would help somebody who decided to dig in and fight this legally. However, most people don't have the resources, time, and they're also shepherding their academic career. And if you violate the IRB in that manner, they will shut down your lab completely. And so that would be most likely getting somebody's career. Or at least, if it was pre-tenure, they'd be doomed. Even if it was after tenure, if you're suspended from research for 2 or 3 or 5 years, it's like, it's just like it's not worth it. It's not worth it. So, but they're bona fide. They're not just academic freedom. There's probably First Amendment issues at stake, which is why I would love for somebody to bring this. So I'm going to do a brief demonstration. So play along with me. So
if you don't like it, you can have Lee investigate it.
It is going to end with that. They can. So I'm going to ask you: Do you prefer cloudy or sunny days in the summer in New York? So you get raise your hand if you prefer cloudy days in the summer in New York. Okay. Raise your hand if you prefer sunny days in New York. Okay. So I just asked you a question. You just answered. A majority of you preferred. I think it was preferred cloudy days in New York. This is an academic research conference. I'm now reporting to you the results of the questions I just asked. Therefore, it constitutes research. Therefore, I needed IRB approval to get it, and I am in violation of IRB rules. What we just did was have a conversation. The First Amendment prohibits the government, and I work at a state university, from interfering in people's speech.
Max Hansbach from Northwestern University. Our law school has, this was a COVID thing, started recording classes, and after COVID, they continued to record classes and put them online. Some of my colleagues hate it. I actually like it because I'm much more likely to have something said about me that's not true than say something awful in class. And I was just wondering how you all feel, particularly for Professor Poole here, about having class conversations recorded, and have you thought about it and the trade-offs of it?
That, I don't think this is working, but I can speak. I would say I have mixed views on it. And I think some people may not open up or want to share more because they may feel like, well, if it's being recorded somewhat, it could be misconstrued or taken a different way. I mean, right now in Florida now, they've even, sort of changed, like on the syllabi now, students have the right to be able to record lectures, but they can only record them for educational purposes. And that was a little controversial because there were faculty saying, well, what, you're going to record me and then you can take it out there and have it twisted, or if you don't like what I say, then they can pick and choose. So I think what has happened is it's created a sense that people are more guarded about what they say. And they tend to be less likely to engage in anything that could be viewed as controversial. I have a colleague in the book now, they're looking for a new textbook to use because there are chapters that cover, quote, certain controversial topics they don't want to deal with. They don't want to deal with. They don't want to deal with if it's dealing with a heavy emphasis on race or heavy emphasis on religion or anything that could be viewed as, I'm not touching it. So I think it could work both ways. I think it depends on the institution. I think it depends on the community where the school is based, and the student body. So I think you have to look at it from that way.
Let's pass the mic around.
Thank you. Thank you for the three of you for your courage and your principles. I appreciate that. One thing, a theme that emerges less so in Professor Poole's case, but in the other two in particular, the idea of this Leviathan-like bureaucracy where no one is held accountable. And one thing that seems to work, particularly in your case, Nick, writing in the press, if you can at least name and shame and hold some accountability that way, that can put a pause, I think. Can you maybe explain a little bit what you think or what your experience has been? Has that led to any success or tempered their movement?
I don't. The university has left me alone since then. But by the time that third investigation over the tweet happened, I'd already been open in the first two. I done my best to embarrass the dean of the university. I'd written an op-ed in the local paper. The bit about hostile language appeared in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. People came to know this is what the University of Utah did. So I don't know if that was that dean trying to exercise payback. That's my theory, that it might dissuade universities from pursuing any investigations, but I don't know for sure.
Thank you. Great talk, everybody. I just to follow on the theme about whether you can protect yourself by having a recording and so on. When I started talking about controversial things about 6 or 7 years ago, I actually got an app and I started recording all my lectures and conversations. I thought that way, if anybody makes something up, I'll be fine. I've started to think differently about it, and for reasons connected with Dr. Poole's experience. So in your case, you had just a journalist who wasn't very careful and wrote the wrong thing. And the truth didn't come to your defense. It was the power of the people who supported you. And I think that as a philosopher, I'm always trying to figure out the reasons behind things. And I get tempted into thinking, okay, what's the moral picture that these people are looking for? What do they consider right and wrong? I try to figure out what's their model of teaching that they respect? What's their model of research that they're trying to promote? And isn't this inconsistent? And I kept thinking about this for a long time, and then I started realizing all that's irrelevant. They don't really have any picture of any of those things. They want to not be hassled, and so if they think they're going to be hassled more if they go after you, they'll go after you, and they'll just make up justifications about how this relates to teaching, research, and ethics. And if there's more pressure against them, then they'll work that way. So I think the best defense is not even necessarily the truth, because even if the truth is on your side, if there's enough pressure against you, they're going to go for you. So I think the best thing is try to set it up so that if they go your way, you'll be really nice and not cause them any hassle. But if they don't go your way, there's going to be way more hassle than the hassle that's coming their way if they go after you. And I think that might be the end of the story.
I will add that one of the contributors, Stephen Porter, wrote an excellent set of suggestions about how to safeguard your career, and they're at the end of the book.
Nice.
I know we're running out of time. I just had a brief comment. Like, do you think this is a plausible interpretation of what you experienced, that in a sense you were made an example of? So yes, it had something to do with you. You lived through it. But it's more, it has the function of like a deterrence effect for colleagues and even perhaps for the next generation of scholars. It establishes a culture of self-censorship. So I'm not saying it wasn't about you, but it wasn't, in a sense, only about you. I don't know, is that really?
I would say the activity itself, I lived what I was teaching them. The activity was talked about how cultural symbols are powerful, and if you don't understand them and use them in the right context, you could create enormous, there can be fallout, there can be all manner of conflict. And then I lived through what I was teaching. It's the irony in the entire lesson is what I was attempting to teach is what I went through, right? And this is stuff we all deal with now, right? So I will say that self-censoring, as you mentioned, it is real. I've seen it. I have colleagues now. They are self-censoring, and it's unfortunate because some of these, I think they're brilliant people, but it's like, listen, the political climate now, we're in the state of Florida. I'm not touching this stuff. So yes, self-censoring is here, and I do think the next generation are less inclined. For example, a colleague and I were talking about syllabi now, and some of our younger colleagues of syllabi are not as detailed in terms of what they cover each week versus how some, I want to say, old school professors, we tend to put everything in there, this and that. I want to be as clear as possible. But some are choosing to be not as detailed or, and I think in a sense that could be viewed as self-censoring because people are looking for things. They're looking and combing through your syllabi to see what are you teaching, what textbook are you using, who's this book by, who is this person? So all of those are things that are in the back of people's mind
The panel supposedly ended, I think, 5 or 10 minutes ago. So thanks, everybody.